Okay, I think that's enough time for anybody that was going to dial in. So we'll get things started from there. I've got the chat window open just here. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them up into the chat as we go. I'll take them at the end. It's a relatively short webinar. We'll be on for around half an hour looking at CSP integrity. And hello from Kentucky. Fantastic. So yeah, quite a ways over west. I'm based in the UK, so I'm coming to you from the north of England right now. And yeah, let's get this show on the road. So, hello to others. Another comment in the chat there as well. So I'll take any questions as we go. We do have Q&A time at the end as well, just after the demo. So if anything arises as we go, if it looks topical, I'll address it in the call. And failing that, I'll pick them all up at the end. So the CSP integrity feature is currently in open beta on the Report Your Eye website right now. So all customers currently have access to this during the open beta. It doesn't matter what level of subscription you're on, everybody has access to it right now. So you can, after this call or after watching this video later, you can immediately go and use this functionality. So before we get started on CSP integrity, I'm just going to give a very quick background on content security policy. And I know that we have other webinars and other materials available. So this will be a very high level overview of what CSP is, content security policy, because we're going to be leaning on that information, demonstrating CSP integrity. So the primary thing to focus on here around content security policy is the control of JavaScript on the page. So ultimately, this is our primary focus. Content security policy does allow you to focus on any type of content on your page. So you could look at images or styles or fonts or anything like that. Those are generally not too much of a concern. JavaScript is usually the primary focus simply because of the amount of power and control that JavaScript has, therefore, the amount of harm that it can do. So the issue that content security policy sought to resolve was that we can, of course, load JavaScript on our website just like this. And this JavaScript might, it might be intended to be there, it might not be intended to be there, it could have been added legitimately or illegitimately. But historically, the web browser would simply see this script tag on the page, and then it would go and load the JavaScript from that URL, load the JavaScript into the page, and then run the JavaScript. So this typically is, 99% of the time, this is going to be good. The script tag was supposed to be there. It's desired functionality and we want it. But of course, with an attack that we know is cross-site scripting, malicious actors can sometimes find a way to get JavaScript into the page that wasn't supposed to be there. This can be an issue with the application, a bit of an oversight, a development error. But there's many different ways that JavaScript that we don't want in the page ends up being in the page. And the browser will still just load that JavaScript and run it. And the reason is the browser doesn't know that it's not supposed to be there. So it loads the page and it sees the script tag. It runs the script tag because it has no information to go on. And a content security policy sought to give it that piece of information. So content security policy is just a HTTP response header. You can see it nestled in the middle here. We've got the content security policy header. And inside the header, we write the security policy that we want the browser to act upon. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in on that policy here, make it a bit larger so we can see. The content security policy header just tells the browser, this is what we expect to happen on our website. And the middle line here, if we look at it, is the script source directive. So we're telling the browser on our page that you're currently browsing, this is where we expect to load JavaScript from. So self just means back from ourselves, so you can load JavaScript from your own domain. And we also expect to load JavaScript from this other domain, somecdn.com. And now the browser has the information that it needs to know if a script is supposed to be there or not supposed to be there. So it will see the script tag, it will analyze the source attribute, it will check it against this list and say, yes, we were expecting to load JavaScript from that domain, and it will load it. If it checks the source attribute of the script and it's not allowed according to this list, then it will not be loaded because the browser now knows that it's not supposed to be there. So in that instance, it will block the script from loading. So we've successfully prevented the attack or the data theft or whatever malicious thing the JavaScript was going to do. And it will then also, if you request, it will reach out to an external service and it will send what we call a violation report. So it will say, you gave us this policy and this piece of JavaScript attempted to be loaded, which is a violation of that policy, and it will send the data externally. And this is the report URI directive down here at the bottom. You simply tell the browser, where do we want this piece of information to go? And this is where our service was named originally, well over a decade ago now, when this functionality was built into browsers, that we took the name of the service from the functionality that we exercise. So now we have this script tag on the page. We know that we are supposed to be loading JavaScript from somecdn.com. The content security policy has authorized that to happen. The browser knows that it's allowed to be here, and the script will load. Now, this is a really powerful position to be in because the vast majority of websites don't have a content security policy. So it's kind of like the Wild West, right? Load anything, do anything, away we go. Nobody knows what's supposed to happen. With a content security policy, you have an enormous level of control in saying these are the expected sources for JavaScript on our website. But there was always this one tiny kind of edge case that you can't fully address with content security policy, which is that we're saying we expect to load JavaScript from somecdn.com, but it doesn't say what JavaScript or how much JavaScript or what should that JavaScript do when we load it. So you're still kind of trusting somecdn.com that they are going to give you the JavaScript that you expected. So really at this point, we can kind of think of this library.min.js as really kind of like unknown code. We know that we're loading it from somecdn.com and that we have said they are an approved supplier of JavaScript, but we still don't really know exactly what we're going to get from them. Now, the web platform created a solution to this problem as well. And it's a very, very simple but very, very powerful mechanism called sub-resource integrity. So you would make a very, very slight change to this script tag, and you would simply add a little bit more information. So sub-resource integrity is this integrity attribute that you can see on the middle line. And what we can do is include the hash, or sometimes we refer to this as the fingerprint, of the file into the script tag. So now when the browser goes to load this script tag, it says, okay, well, somecdn.com is an approved source of JavaScript. We are allowed to load JavaScript from this location. So it will then fetch the file, but it will then hash the file and compare the fingerprint to the one in the script tag. So if that fingerprint matches the one that we were expecting, we can then say, okay, we've loaded JavaScript from an approved source of JavaScript, and we've checked the file was the file that we were expecting. So now if somecdn.com is compromised or their JavaScript file is infected with malware or whatever might happen to it, when the browser fetches that file, the fingerprints will mismatch and it will know the file has been tampered with. And again, it will reject the file and say, this is not the file that we were expecting. Something has changed, therefore we're not going to accept it. And it will discard that file. So sub-resource integrity has been around for more than a decade now. This is a very common approach in terms of securing especially your third-party dependencies. When you're loading code from other locations, you can check that you're getting exactly the code that you wanted to get. But this only works if that file that you are loading is a static file. Because if the file that you're loading from that third party is dynamic in nature, then we can't know what the fingerprint of the file is in order to put the fingerprint into this script tag, because every time the browser goes there, the file may have changed. So in some scenarios like that, and this is a very common problem with SRI, you can't use it because the third-party file is dynamic. It's not a static file. And in order to do the integrity checking, it needs to be a static file. So many, many times, many scenarios, we see customers face this problem where they can't use SRI and they just have to go back to the standard script tag because this file at the third-party location is dynamic in nature. And that means that we can't integrity check it. So we're still in a relatively strong position in that we know the sources of JavaScript on our website are approved. Somecdn.com is still an approved supplier of JavaScript based on the content security policy that we looked at. But we've lost the ability to integrity check the file that they are serving to us because, let's say, it's dynamic in nature. And this is the problem that we can now start to address with CSP integrity with our new feature. Because if we take a look at the content security policy that we were talking about just a moment ago, this is the exact same policy as we had. And all we need to do to enable our new feature is make one simple addition to the script source directive, which is this highlighted in orange. So if you have an existing content security policy, that's as simple as a change that you need to make to enable this new feature. And if you don't have a content security policy, then you don't need to write one. You can simply have the script source directive and just put the report SHA-256 keyword in there. And what this is doing now is it's saying to the browser, for all of the scripts that we do load, so for example, a script that came from somecdn.com, we want you to send us the SHA-256 fingerprint of the files that are being loaded. So we want the browser to check what the fingerprint is and then send that through to the reporting endpoint specified below, as we talked about earlier. So this is a very, very simple change, but it's quite fundamental because previously the browser would only send us information for script files that were blocked, script files that violated the security policy, so that we could know that there was a problem. But now what we're saying to the browser is we also want to keep a track of the script files that we are loading, because of course, in order to integrity check the file, to hash the file, we have to load it. So this will only apply to scripts that are permitted according to the security policy. They are loaded. The browser will then hash them and send that fingerprint through again to an external service like us. So these telemetry events are very, very simple. It will tell us the page of your site that the browser was visiting at the time. As you can see here on the second line, it will tell us the asset that was loaded. So this is the same asset that we were just looking at a moment ago. And it will then tell us the hash of this file. So we now have all of the necessary information to say we've got what we need to integrity check this file to see if this file is what we expected. So if there are multiple files loaded on your site, the browser will send us a nice compact payload that includes all of the files and all of the integrity attributes as well. So based on our current functionality, because this is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is currently in open beta. We are still actively working on this feature, but based on the current benefits that this gives us, there's already quite a few in there. So the first thing is that this is the fingerprint of the file that your actual visitor in their browser saw. So when we have this information sent to us, we know that this is definitely the fingerprint of the file that your user was exposed to. So if we, for example, were to then want to go and fetch that file ourselves for some additional analysis, we have the precise fingerprint of that file. So we can definitively say this is the exact code that your users are running in their browsers. We've done some quite extensive gathering of data already in terms of it's about 12.8 million different fingerprints in our database of verified files. So files of libraries, of tools, of widgets, of plugins that we have verified the source of. We've gathered the fingerprints of those files. And now if we see one of these reports come in, we can take the fingerprint of that file and look it up in our database to say, for example, if this file says it is jQuery version 3.1.2, we can take the fingerprint of the file, go into our database and say, does that match the expected fingerprint of this library? Is it what it claims to be? So we have a huge capability already to look at those fingerprints and say, do we recognize the file? Because if it's a common library, if it's a common file, then it will quite easily match one of the fingerprints in our database. The other thing, of course, is that then on an ongoing basis, if the fingerprint of the file being reported changes, we can know immediately that the file has changed. Now, the change may, of course, be expected, but also the change may not be expected. But we now have the data to say, up until a particular day and time, we had this version of the file, and then from this point forward, we saw a different fingerprint being reported. So we know precisely when the file changed from the before and after. And the final piece that we currently have available right now is that if the fingerprint matches against a known verified file, we also then have external sources of data on vulnerabilities in common libraries. So if you are loading a file, going back to my jQuery example, that version of jQuery has a known vulnerability, then we will identify that in our UI and surface the information to you to say you're loading jQuery version 3.1.2 and it has a known vulnerability, and it will provide all of the information about which versions of the library the vulnerability is present in, which version you need to patch up to if the vulnerability is resolved. And all of that will be surfaced in our UI automatically. Now, on top of the current benefits, all of those features are currently available right now in the open beta, so you can go and use those immediately, as I just discussed. But also looking a little bit more towards the future in terms of things that we're actively working on or will be working on soon, there's also much more that we can do with these CSP integrity reports. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the difficulties that a service might typically have is if your users are loading JavaScript from a given URL, if we load that file, we might be served a different file than the file that your user saw. So this is quite a common thing in some advanced attacks where if it's a browser from a residential IP address loading the file, they'll get malware. And if it is a cloud hosting IP or some other IP, or it's a client that doesn't look like an end user browser, they would be served a file that doesn't contain the malware. So from different vantage points, you can see a different file. But because we have the fingerprint of the file that your user saw, we can detect if somebody's trying to mask the content of the file. So if we go retrieve the file, we can check the fingerprint and know for sure that we have the file your user saw, and then we can cache that on an ongoing basis. So again, if you've detected that the hash of the file has changed, you can pull the before and after version to see what was the change in the file. This was the hash from last week, this is the hash from this week, and we could diff those files to understand what actually changed if there was a problem. We're looking at code analysis that we can do on those JavaScript files that we do successfully retrieve. So looking at the behaviors of the file, does it pull additional dependencies? Does it make outbound communications? Is it accessing certain things within the page? So our ability to now know that we definitely have the correct code means that any analysis that we do is going to be accurate. So I'm really quite excited about what we could do with that. We are currently working on a feature where you can supply your own fingerprints. So if you build and bundle your own JavaScript files to load into your application, you can provide the fingerprints of those files to us. So again, we can detect if the files you're loading are the files that you expect, or again, if there's a deviation, the fingerprint changes and it's no longer matching one of your expected fingerprints. So it will become very obvious that the file has been modified, it has changed. And then you can in the future, you can request notifications on that. So if one of your verified files changes, you can request that we will notify you that we've observed that one of your files has indeed changed. So this is hopefully all coming in the back end of this year, being Q1 26. We're going to continue working on these open beta features. But in terms of what's available now on the previous slide and what's available in the short term on this particular slide here, we have hopefully a lot of very useful and quite exciting features. So just to show what this looks like in our UI, this is a relatively simple feature to enable. As we just saw, you only need that one report directive in your content security policy. And just to show you what that raw data looks like when it's coming into your account. So this is, if you're familiar with our dashboard, CSP Integrity is just a new page over on the left side menu here. And this is our kind of default view of the CSP integrity reports. So you can see here the page that the user was navigating to. So in this instance here, they were on our home page or somewhere in our account section. We surface the standard information about the type of browser sending the telemetry. So as you can see here, it's already quite widely supported. We're receiving telemetry from Chrome on both Windows and Mac there. We've got Edge. So this is quite a widespread support already, despite being a relatively new technology. You can see here a couple of the differences between a file that we've identified the source of versus a file that we've not. So of course, this is one of our custom files here that we build ourselves, and we've not yet, as I mentioned, we've not yet got the custom fingerprint identification set up. So as soon as we do, we would be able to provide the fingerprint of this file, and this would show as one of our verified files. But for now, we can only identify the files from public libraries. So you can see here, as an example, that we're loading a file from Bootstrap. And that is based on the fact that this is the fingerprint of the file. We have gone to Bootstrap, pulled down their source, and independently created these fingerprints to allow us to map it back and say, with a high degree of confidence, that this is the file and this is the library that it is from. So this is what it looks like in the UI. You can search on any number of parameters. Again, if you're familiar with our UI, the search functionality here will be familiar. So you can search for assets based on their fingerprints. So if you want to see as an example, what period of time were we loading a script file with this fingerprint? You could do a search on it and run back through the full history. And yeah, this is at a very high level what this kind of functionality is going to look like in the UI. As we add more features throughout the remainder of the open beta, they will become available in the UI. But for now, as I said on that current benefit slide, everything that we've just discussed and talked about is currently live. All you have to do is add that report SHA-256 directive to your policy, and the browser will immediately start sending the reports. The useful things that we can do then start happening once we are receiving that telemetry. So yeah, first of all, let me just jump back over to the chat window. If anyone has any questions on anything so far, now would be a great time for me to address a couple of those. I see some more people dropped in whilst I was busy chatting away. I'll just give a moment to see if anybody's typing a question away there. And yeah, the open beta is available and running now. And if you are currently using the service in any way, then you already have access to this. So you can simply go into your content security policy, add the directive. There is a documentation page as well. So if you come to our docs subdomain and go to the CSP integrity setup, it will talk you through the options here in terms of providing the specific examples of what you need to add to your policy in order to make this work. But it is quite literally a simple case of adding that directive, and then you will receive the data. It talks about the verified files example I just gave you. This is what it would look like if you have a vulnerability detected in one of your libraries. So again, because we can reliably identify the library, we can then cross-check external sources of information for vulnerabilities. And if you do have one, we will identify that in our UI like this. And of course, then you can click out to the source of the vulnerability information that we found. So even if a library, of course, when you start using it doesn't have a vulnerability, it may develop a vulnerability in the future, at which point you would then be able to request to be notified about that as well. So yeah, that covers everything from my side in terms of, like I said, just kind of a whistle-stop tour of those different features. This is all currently in open beta, so if you do find any problems, if you have any feature suggestions or feature requests, definitely reach back out. We're currently actively taking feedback on this and, working towards making this a much better product than it is right now. It's still quite early stages, but we wanted to get this out into people's hands to see, is there anything out there that people might like to see or might like to ask for. So yeah, I'm just going to jump back over to the chat window and see if anybody has any questions at all. Now would be a really good time to pop them in before we kind of look to wrap up pretty much on time there, actually, which will be very nice. No, I don't think I see anything coming through. Hopefully, a couple of comments here. Yep, no problem. You're welcome. It does look very promising. I genuinely believe that there is quite a lot that we can do with this. It is a fundamental change. Normally, the browsers only report on things that are broken or wrong, and this is a way to report on the things that are happening that are correct. The scripts that we're loading here are permitted according to your policy, but now we're really starting to do integrity checking on the code that's running in the browser. And that's a really powerful position to be. The actual reporting of the data itself, as you saw, is very simple. You just turn it on and it sends the data. The real value comes with what we can do with that data after the fact, tracking changes over time, identifying files based on their fingerprints, doing code analysis, but knowing it's the code that we're analyzing is exactly the code that your users were exposed to in the browser. So this is a really fundamental shift in our capabilities as a service, but also as the broader kind of web ecosystem. This is a very fundamentally different capability in the web browsers now. So I'm very excited to see this develop. I'm very excited to see more people start using this because that will allow us to gather some really useful feedback and information on how we can improve this further. So go and give it a whirl. Like I say, it's completely free to access during the open beta, which is now. We're running the open beta until at least early next year. So we'll, based on the feedback, based on the development, of course, we'll gauge that We'll gauge that as time goes by. Once we feel it's in a point where we're satisfied to take it out of beta and make it GA, then we will. But for now, you definitely have some time where you can go and play with this feature and let us know what you think and let us know if you want anything in particular. But that pretty much brings us out on time. There's no more questions come through in the chat, so I'm going to wrap it up there. And hopefully, drop me an email if anybody would like to see anything in particular afterwards. That would be awesome. So thank you very much.